Yeah, guess I better change that. All right, we're live. This is Hangops something coworking edition. I don't know. I'm gonna keep it super cash today. Anyway, so hello to all you peoples out there who might be watching.
What are y'all working on today?
What the heck, Jake? In a meeting, he said he'd be here. What am I working on? Email. That's what I'm working on. Email.
I know a company that can help you with that.
No, not sending, like catching up on mine.
Okay.
Yeah. No, gosh, I don't know. So much has changed since last time I was here. I feel like I did at least one of these where I was at Travis. I don't know, but anyway, I'm at Travis. See, I know. And since November, I've become a manager. So got that. It's all email and Google Docs. Manager life.
All day, every day.
So.
I'm working on monitoring for our chat ops bots and trying to get not alerted on the bot when it's really just an issue with HipChat.
Cool. Are you running hosted or the on-prem HipChat? What'd you say, Sean?
We run hosted HipChat.
Hosted. Okay.
We run our HipChat bot in-house. We have issues sometimes where, because we run our own data centers, so when we have like routing issues on the greater internet talking to Amazon, we sometimes have issues just from the data centers talking to HipChat, but like everyone in the office can get the HipChat, and so they wonder, why is the bot messed up? So adding monitoring for that edge case is fun, while not turning it into, oh, the HipChat API has a problem right now, because I can't do anything about that.
Gotcha. What else is there? Who just joined? Hi, caller. You're on Shop Talk.
Hey guys, give me 2 minutes. I'm gonna find a room.
Okay. Oh, I apparently have to enable this before I can save it. No, darn. It's not transparent. See, this GIF is actually a cool one because it's Mr. T with the mustache wiggling. That's the informal name for our Travis mascot, by the way, is Mr. T. Anywho. Supposedly somewhere there's a thing where it's like the Jenkins body, but with a Mr. T head. Rumor has it.
For
Yeah, it's a really
maximum
good
confusion.
one. I've seen that somewhere or other.
It's I believe it's like the hero Brian of Travis. It's the hero Brian of the CI industry. May or may not exist. So. How is everyone?
I'm doing well, thanks.
That didn't work. Oh, it did work. That one's too transparent. Cool. What do you use for monitoring, Sean?
Use Sensu.
What
I
does that
don't
for you?
appear to be able to do wildcard dependency matching. which is not what I wanted to find out today. It works out pretty well for us. We had like a mixed bag of Nagios and Ichinga before, and that did not work out well for us. Switching to Sensu's been a lot. It was a lot of work, but it works all of the time, which we could not say about Nagios in our environment.
Interesting.
We've kind of rolled Sensu into our metric collection side too, which Nagios was not doing well for us either.
Would you be able to discuss your Sensu architecture a little bit and like what transports and stuff you're using?
Yeah, so we use the default RabbitMQ and Redis stuff with Sensu, and then we built a graphite metric consumer. So all of our metric checks, they push into a particular queue in RabbitMQ, and we wrote a Go-based, basically queue consumer. The built-in one wasn't working well for us, and we talked about open sourcing it, but we always end up having more important stuff to do right now. But between metrics and checks, we do about 5,000 checks, or we get about 5,000 results per second per data center. And it works pretty well for us. We have had issues with RabbitMQ in that. If we have a network issue inside the data center, nothing works. But moving out of our old data center definitely helped with that. We haven't had that happen in the two new ones. We were running on some really aging hardware that would just cause net splits across the data center. Yeah, so we really like Sensu. It's worked out really well for us. It's easy for our developers to get their heads around. So, we write Sensu checks in our chef stuff, and they're able to just adopt and tune and add monitoring whenever they want. It's pretty slick.
So how do you deploy the agents? Do you run them like locally on each box?
Yeah, so we do all standalone checks. We don't do the subscription-based stuff. So like a developer who writes an app also has a recipe in that app for monitoring that sets up the Sensu clients, or the Sensu checks, and then we have, just as part of our base setup, a Sensu client installation. We haven't had to do much with dependencies before this, and so this lack of wildcard dependencies is frustrating me right now. I'm hoping that I'm just doing it wrong and there's a way to do that.
What was I going to ask you? You said you do some metrics collection with it as well?
Yeah, so a lot of our apps don't have, like they keep metrics about themselves, but they don't emit them anywhere, just because that's how they were built 5 or 6 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But they do normally have some sort of endpoint or command I can run to get those metrics. And so we have Sensu metrics plugins to gather that data and put them in the Rabbit queue, and then we consume them from there into Graphite.
Interesting.
Rather than spend the developer time to go instrument and add like statsd to every daemon we have in 5 languages, we just started from that point on. Everything we build has it built in, but all the old stuff, we figured it's easier to write a shell script to grab the stuff you already have and just put that in Sensu.
That makes sense. Do you do any like sensu checks that are kind of more like what I think of as like maybe the Nagios style or the NRPE kind of like process running, or is all your learning driven off metrics?
We do some process level stuff. Tend not to, just because we don't actually care if the process isn't running as long as it's able to do what it does. So most of our, I would say 85% of our checks are actual functional checks. Can I do a thing? If not, then we have a problem. Which has led us to some issues with MTTR. Like, why isn't it doing the thing? I have to go find out now, rather than having the process stopped. So we've had healthy discussions about that.
Okay. Yeah. One of the things that has been on my mind lately has sort of been the like can you do all metrics driven alerting? Or do you need like sort of some of the other what I think was like more traditional styles of like health checking monitoring?
We do very little metrics-based alerting because most of that has to do with like the pattern of those metrics change day to day and hour to hour. And so tuning them for that particular time period might be rough. We do have a couple that are more like latency based. Like, we know when something gets too high. It's really hard to know when something gets too low. And because we do most of our alerting out of, like our metric stuff, we would normally do out of an aggregate in Graphite. That's really rough for us because we don't aggregate most of our metrics. So we'd have to have Graphite do the aggregation at check time, which is rough, which is why we do so little of it.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think getting rid of health check endpoints would be challenging and going with only metrics, especially for seldom used services or anything that has unpredictable bursts of activity.
Especially for things like processes that run for a long time but only do things every now and then, like batch processes. That would be rough.
The health check will also have more immediate information that something is wrong.
Be interested to see or to hear how you do your health check stuff. So we have two endpoints in every daemon that we call them health check and traffic check. So the traffic check is more along the lines of, should the load balancer send you traffic? And the health check is more, are you and your dependencies okay? Because sometimes we will fail a health check if, like say your dependency is failing, but you can still serve your data. I'd be interested to hear how other people do that. Do you check your dependencies at all in your health checks? Or is that too much coupling?
No, we check our dependencies. So can I talk to the database? Am I getting Rabbit information, Redis, so on and so forth? Some of our health checks even check our third-party dependencies. So can we talk to our payment processor, or are they currently down? Yeah, we don't have a traffic check. We have a ping endpoint, which really just outputs the version. That's useful for during a deploy. Am I installed? And then health check, am I installed correctly? And then start sending traffic there.
So what's interesting is we kind of have almost like the opposite approach. With the exception of some external like pingdom stuff, all of our alerting is metric driven or log based like aggregation that either turns directly into alert or drives metrics that then turn into an alert. But there are some cases where we think, or like it might be interesting, I start thinking like, oh, this would be a place where maybe like some kind of an agent-driven check would be interesting, but we don't actually have like a tool in place that supports that easily at the moment. But besides our build environments, most of our stuff also runs on Heroku. So it's a little bit sort of a different situation in terms of the scaling and, health checking and keeping things running and so on. It does a certain amount of that for you.
Do you utilize a circuit breaker as much at Travis CI?
Henrik, you want to comment? You're muted, but
No, I'm not muted, I think. We do have some circuit breakers in place, I think, but they're... Actually, I'm not sure if we have that deployed yet. But we've experimented with some circuit breaker stuff, but there's only one place where we've added them, which is like in between one of the infrastructures we boot VMs in and our own API that actually talks to that. So we have a circuit breaker, a very basic one in place, but it's still it's mostly an experiment for now, and I don't think it's all tuned to the point we want it.
Yeah, I remember when we put that in, that it sort of fizzled out a little bit. That whole effort. It's probably something that we should revisit at some point, though. Just other stuff happened. I don't know.
yeah, I mean, I think there's a fair amount of loose coupling that allows. I mean, like there are different queues, in the generic sense in the system that like can get backed up, and so that's what a lot of our alerting is around, is like queue depth of something, or if there's a spike in like like say the 95th percent time for something to happen, things like that, sort of like percentile based or just like actual like count based things tend to seem to work pretty well for telemetry for us. What kind of type stuff are you seeing or using?
Not much. We need to improve at being more anti-fragile. So when optional dependencies are unavailable, we need to do a better job at not completely shitting the bed, if you will. So I was curious how other people were handling that.
Gotcha. Well, what's interesting is it seems like that is a not uncommon, like startup dependencies on network, like resources that are across the network, right? That was one of the contributing factors in the GitHub postmortem that came out yesterday, is that a lot of their apps were blocked on startup because Redis was unavailable.
Yeah, it seems like a hard problem to solve with just a DevOps tool set and mindset. You really need defensive application development, I think.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, even within uh, the team I'm managing at Travis, which kind of like build infrastructure engineering is probably the best like formalish title for the team. We don't really have as much of a formal title, but so we're not strictly an operations team. We're doing the development and deployment and running of like the services closely related to building and running the build environment, VMs and containers, and how the default build environments are built, etc. But we aren't like strictly just an ops team. So we're involved in the development of our own services and things like that, and we share in development of some of the other services that are running on Heroku as well. I mean, we run some of our own like services that we manage on Heroku. Some we run in the compute environment, right in the compute environments for a little bit of like network partition resiliency and things. But it has kind of been an interesting shift to from like strictly like your ops into more like we're an engineering team with sort of what you could think of as more of a traditionally ops heavy focus and background because of the fact that we're dealing with public clouds and data centers and a lot of that stuff with what our services and automation are doing. Which also makes hiring interesting because it's like you're looking for a certain blend of experience and skills on from potentially both sort of traditional backgrounds of more like ops or more like development, but you're looking for those folks that are sort of in the middle, and which we are hiring right now. So it's interesting.
Yeah, we've been having the same hiring challenge of almost looking for unicorns, 50% application dev and 50% traditional ops.
Yay, I'm a unicorn.
You making bacon back there?
Yeah, it's my late breakfast.
Bacon pancakes. Yeah, it is interesting too, and it's like I would say I put a fair amount of work into even like the job description and trying to kind of like a little bit of more of a formal title and like even sort of like formalizing a little bit like, well, what is the identity of this team? And because the idea of these like separate focus teams is relatively new to the company. The last 14, 15 months have gone from like 10 people to 25. So it's like people scaling challenges, and then that rolls back into okay, like how do we craft the requirements and the like experience we hope someone has, and like what you'll be doing to potentially be attractive to diverse backgrounds, because someone who maybe their background is in Ruby development or Java development or something, but they most recently have been working somewhere that's primarily using like AWS, right? They very well could be doing Chef and Packer and Terraform and Ansible and AWS SDK libraries and stuff to deploy everything. I mean, I necessarily need like as many ops focused people because so much of like the data center automation and provisioning and so forth is API driven now. So it's like they have some of the hands-on experience like building out the production environment and then helping be responsible for operating it. That the lines have gotten a lot fuzzier, even in some of the candidate applications we've seen, both hiring. Now we've been we put a job ad up on Monday, and so we've been seeing applicants come in for that, but we've also been hiring for Ruby and JavaScript developers for a couple months, and even some of the Ruby developers that have applied have had like a fair amount of like, I've been doing these things in AWS, and like I've been doing stuff with like Chef or Packer, or like some of these tools, because now it's so much more accessible to get VMs and networks and load balancers and all these things.
We have a position open for a data center operations engineer right now, and it has been very hard to get that. I think the switch to Amazon has made so many people's lives easier that we've forgotten how to do hardware sometimes. It's been a hard position for us to fill because we need that person to also know like how to use Chef to provision the same boxes that they use. I don't know. It feels like it's been hard.
No, I think it is. I think even GitHub is looking for another like person. It's like, do you like metal and automation? It's like, well, you know, it's an interesting intersection of things.
That was one of the things whenever I went to Travis that was sort of weird is I really like hardware stuff, and my old company, managed all their own data centers and whatnot. And not the case at Travis, so I kind of miss hardware stuff sometimes, but overall, a major improvement. I don't miss Drax very that much though. At least the way how we had our Drax set up at my old place.
The new Dell remote stuff has native VNC support finally. Like you don't need the Java client. So nice.
That is a relief, finally. I mean, it's still VNC, so there's still somewhere to go up from that, but really there's
Right.
nothing else that has beaten VNC.
There's nowhere you could go down, I feel like.
Yeah. Yeah. We just had a lot of issues with just it seemed like if a host had some sort of like locked up or had some sort of error or whatever, it seemed like we had like a 30 to 40% chance that the Drac had also just like bitten it sometime like some few months before that or something like that, and I don't know. So we just found ourselves in this situation occasionally where we couldn't reboot the box without someone on site because the Drac was dead and the host was dead, and so yeah.
Then you have to call Smart Hands and hope that Smart Hands is actually smart at the time.
Right. Yeah. It's absolutely ridiculous that we had like host monitoring for all machines and all of their Dracs. So like the moment that they stopped responding on HTTP or whatever, then we go and make sure that we can that we reboot the Drac from the machine or whatever. Then we were running FreeBSD and not there. I think that in a couple of cases there were issues with like the uh, the particular combination of hardware and what binaries you could get to run on whatever version of FreeBSD that was, and it was just a huge compounding bad thing. I don't know. And there might have been some way around it, but I don't know. Yeah.
One of the things that I did with hardware one time was dealing with IBM X series hardware, and their equivalent of the DRAC you could run a serial console with, and that seemed to be a little bit more stable.
Yeah, but the thing that's weird about those is that the license key is like a physical module, isn't it? Or at least it was for some of the things that we had. And so uh, I think we had some dated hardware at one point that we were just trying to like we just wanted to put it into like just be something somewhere, and we essentially couldn't because the license was this physical module that you could only find in a couple of places or whatever. I don't know. That uh, I wasn't super involved in that, but it seemed kind of silly at the time. Rather than in comparison to Drex, where just like an XML file with some key or whatever. Um,
Well, the whole thing with Java and DRAC cards is a mess. I'm glad to hear that's been done away with.
yeah.
I mean, it has to be if Oracle's killing the plugin soon, right?
Yeah, I was gonna say just in the nick of time too. And I guess everybody who has any hardware that is, before made before the past year or so is just up a river.
We'll all be keeping Windows XP VMs.
I'm trying to get my some way to get my D-Link camera server running and working again, but you can't look at anything because of the stupid Java plugin.
Yeah, now that I'm thinking of it, I think my personal server, my bits. I don't know. I need to see if there's maybe like some sort of firmware update or something like that that'll come out for my super micro board that I have. Which is incredibly unlikely. And pretty much is the only reason that I have Java installed on, at least for a time, was the only reason that I had Java installed on stuff. But
So Jake, I understand you're like single-handedly making all the new HashiCorp projects. Is that true?
Dude, that is not true.
They're like Nomad and Otto are all you. Is that true?
Yeah, just check my GitHub. It's all me.
What are you doing over there?
Doing some SRE stuff. Right now, I'm working on getting Vault up and going in a different environment. So it's fun. Working on some cool stuff. How are things over at Travis?
Good. We already talked about that, which you'd know if you weren't late. what kind of stuff are you up to? Details.
Oh, we've got a lot of secret stuff coming. Can't say too much.
We won't tell anyone.
Nah.
My favorite thing about HashiCorp has been, like, I know what they're going to come out with because it's whatever I need right now. And then in like 2 months, it'll be a product out of HashiCorp.
Well, if that rule applies to me, that means they're pivoting into public cloud here soon.
Atlas is pretty close, isn't it?
Infinitely scalable public cloud that runs OS 10.
Yeah, that's when we debut Hashi.
That's a direct quote.
Hang on while I message my friend over at BuzzFeed.
Hang on while I post that to Hacker News.
Wait, so you're admitting you don't have Hacker News Blackhold? Shame, shame, shame.
So to be honest, Hacker News is why I got into this stuff. I didn't actually know that it was a message board, and just thought that it was the thing that I got cool headlines and tweets about from the Y Combinator bot. And so when I switched from internal IT, like doing Exchange and stuff, into more like web operation stuff, it was only because I had paid attention to Hacker News. So it gets a really bad rap, but it's got a soft spot in my heart. It's great as long as you don't touch the comments, right?
Pretty much all the internet. Never read the comments. Doubly so for YouTube.
There's a post recently about how the whole never read comments thing is kind of almost enabling this culture of like shitty comments and stuff. But what can they do? They're terrible. Don't read them.
Oh, it's totally taking an ignorance is bliss. I mean, I'm going back into the Matrix to eat the steak, and everything's gonna go to shit. But sorry, I don't have the time.
No, absolutely, yeah.
And this thing has been, it's been around, like, I don't know. I always refer to the classic, Penny Arcade from, like, 2004. It's the Unreal Tournament 2004 lends incontrovertible proof to John Gabriel's greater internet fuckwad theory. Normal person plus anonymity plus audience equals total fuckwad. So
Yeah.
it's like 10 years old.
But it seems to be getting worse. I mean, even Facebook political comments where you're not anonymous.
I think it's really that nobody fears the violence of someone slapping you upside the head when you say stupid stuff anymore.
Yeah, I mean, there's always a question of, are we not applying enough social pressure, or do they just not care about social pressure? And it's like, you can't fix the latter situation. If you just don't care about social pressure, it's like, well, sure, we're enabling it, but we're enabling it even if we're there. In fact, we're enabling it more if we react to them.
Sounds like we need the XKCD bot that reads back all of your comments to you.
There isn't as much social pressure when you're on the internet, though. Like there's not that fear of being judged by your peers as harshly when you're on the internet.
Well, that's growing a little bit with all the situations where people get fired because of something they say online kind of thing. But then that just sparks the adds fuel to the fire. So.
Dude, you're making me hungry just sitting there watching you.
Kind of hard to argue with bacon.
Yeah, and egg fried in bacon grease.
So for any of you that have been involved in either like managing a hiring process or maybe doing like phone screens or like technical screens of in hiring. Recently, say in the last year or two, have you done any like looking at potential candidates like online social media sort of at all, like Twitter or anything before talking to them?
I do not.
Like stalking them?
If it's on their resume, it's fair game, I think. But like, I don't go Googling for them.
Well, I mean, most of the tools these days auto discover, right? Like we use Workable, and like if it can figure out like LinkedIn, Google Plus, Facebook, Twitter, all the major ones, like it'll pull it in there. You don't even have to provide it. It'll say like what was automatically retrieved and what was provided by the candidate. So it's not so hard to. It's sort of like right there in the interface if you want it.
I'm going to suspect HR would prefer I not tell you my answer. But sometimes I do read people's not anonymous internet comments, and I can't help but wonder if they're not worried about being Googled.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting, right? Like, I don't know. I've always felt, for me personally, I was able to keep a strong parity between like IRL Brandon and online Brandon, just in terms of like behavior and stuff. But that's not. I realize that's not always the case. Although I'm sure there's some IRC logs from the early 2000s that I'm glad aren't indexed. But it's like I don't know, I've always sort of tried to maintain a fair amount of consistency, and such that if anyone were to Google me, and I do regularly Google myself, it's like okay, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I just try to do anything really stupid, and or if I do, learn from it, and make sure that if somebody brings it up in the future, I'm like, yeah, that was stupid.
Personally, like I don't really like care much about their Twitter. Like I've clicked through some of the links if like it wasn't clear from what they provided, maybe like location or something. Like I might check like, oh, does one of the other things say like their location? Just thinking about like time zone and whatnot. But otherwise, yeah, I don't know. It doesn't seem, I don't know, even like worth the time. I feel like if it gets to the point where you're talking to them, you should be able to suss out who they are.
Or like, I've never been a hiring manager, so I don't know. Are peer checks? Is that even legal to check with your peers? Like, hey, have you heard of this person? What are they like?
I think that's okay. And they're going to have to work with the person.
So it's legal. The biggest issue that I've seen is that if you were to say something, if the person being asked were to say something, and the person that was being asked about found out about it and it was disparaging, it could cause a civil action. And so a lot of people are fearful about that, particularly for a past employer, right? So, for example, a good indicator that the person you're looking at is not a good hire is if they don't say anything, unless they make it clear that their corporate policy is that they don't say anything.
Okay. Because like I knew that like a past employer, they're not allowed to say like disparaging comments. They're only allowed to say like I have no comment. But I didn't know if like a peer review of like, hey, I'm going to ask my friend who used to work with you on an off the record kind of basis.
No, it's completely legit, and the biggest thing is really not so much of a government civil issue. It's more of a um, you know, could it end up being an issue around a covered person, right? So, for example, you ask about someone's age, right? Well, how old do you think they are? that's that's a problem, right? Or so, what country is that guy from? Probably not a good question, right? So I think the biggest concern is uh, companies being concerned about either questions about covered individuals or disparaging comments that might create a cause of action. But the most interesting thing I've seen come up lately, and it was something I don't know if I mentioned it on Hangops, but I had a company I was talking to, and they wanted complete tax returns. Yeah, I told them no, and they hung up on me, which was kind of funny.
Why would they think that would be relevant?
They said, well, it's possible that you're only making $80,000 a year, and if we offer you, $250,000 a year, that's going to be a problem for us. And I just said, you know what, the market's the market. You guys make a market-based offer. I said, if I'm making 80 grand a year right now with over 20 years experience, I'm doing something wrong, especially as a consultant. So, and regardless, I said, the market's the market. You guys make an offer. That's your job. My job is to look at the offer and say yes or no.
Yeah, if you're trying to double or triple your salary, doesn't really matter.
Right, and the bottom line is, if you show up in a most likely in a $250,000 job, and you've been doing an $80,000 a year job, you're going to fail at it pretty quickly because you're gonna have no idea what to do. But on the flip side, if you're successful, why the heck does the hiring company even care, right? Because they're either getting value or they're not. So, but I mean, it's for me, it was kind of more the principle of the thing. Yes, if I were, I think someone had brought up that this is fairly common in sales. So yeah, if I'm a sales guy and I want to demonstrate that I've been meeting quota, whenever else, okay, great, not a problem. But especially for a lot of us that have been consulting for a while, I don't just have a W-2. The W-2 comes from my corporation, and I have multiple K-1s from different things I've invested in, and it's just not relevant. And it's kind of odd. It's kind of like, we need to look in your closet before we hire you. No.
Now, if you were applying for your dream job and they asked you to show the tax return, would you do it, or would you reconsider your dream job?
Well,
because I mean, at that point, it's like, well, maybe you guys are people I thought you were. If you're asking that.
Well, it all depends. I mean, so.
I mean, it's a test.
Well, it's kind of more, number one, asking for my tax returns is probably illegal under U.S. law because of information about whether or not I'm a covered person. If I am a covered person, that's a problem. However, because it's part of the hiring decision, right? The only people that can really do that, and I've worked for the government before in sensitive positions. I've held a clearance before. So in that case, they did more than look at my tax returns. But it had nothing to do with compensation. It was a separate issue, right? It was, hey, we want to make sure that you're a trustworthy individual, and they looked at everything, every single credit card, every single bank account, all of my neighbors, everything. But that's a whole different deal, right? I understand why they're doing that. It's not because, it's not because they had a very good justification for doing so, right?
Quick question for those of us who aren't in the States. Covered person?
Oh, okay, so for example, in the U.S., if you're covered by it's not FSLA. It's EEO something, right? It's administered by Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. So, for example, covered people are if you're over age 40, if you're whether or not you have children. So, if you have children, I believe, I don't know if it's just being a woman or being single. I think it's actually if you have children, period. You're a covered person. What else? Religion. You can't ask about religion. You can't ask about national origin. There's a couple other things in the U.S. that if you make a hiring decision, a disparate, well, actually any kind of, actually even four, I think, there's a potential cause of action.
Oh, okay. So the covered thing just refers to equal opportunity hiring.
Yeah, if you go, well, I don't like Christians, so you're not going to. If that person finds out, that's a huge problem, right?
Yeah.
There are very few organizations that are not covered under that. So, for example, if you're a church where you can say, we're going to hire Christians, or we're a temple, we're going to hire Hindus, right? Not a problem. But for most commercial organizations, but again, not everyone is covered. So, and it's also fairly complex. So I know someone that got fired from the Postal Service, and they claimed that they were discriminated against because they were Norwegian, and they won their suit. So it's civil, not criminal, so it's a fairly complex part of law. Way too much information on that for today, though, for a Friday.
Yeah, sorry.
I joined so
Oh,
late,
that's okay.
I wasn't sure what the context was that we were talking about this under, but it does sound like if in the kind of work that I would guess most people on this Hangout are doing, if the potential employer's demands are too burdensome, there probably are better choices out there.
Well, and that was actually the decision that I made as well. I mean, if you actually want a copy of my tax return before you're going to make an offer, and we're talking about a very senior, very visible role in your organization, and again, I never said how much I wanted or how much I would take or anything else. It's just like, in order for us to make an offer, we need to see your tax returns. No. You probably have some kind of market rate that you have figured out there. You probably have some sort of idea. And if you don't, you're probably incompetent, and I don't want to work with you.
Well, kind of where we got on this thread, Bridget, was we got talking about, like,
you're asking about social media.
Yeah, well, it started with, like, don't read the comments or something, and then that was like, when you're hiring people, or like if you're involved in, say, like a phone screen or technical screen or whatever, like, where you know about the candidate, a little bit ahead, like, do you maybe look at their, like, online social media presence? Like I was saying, like in Workable, which we're using, like it'll auto discover a fair amount of, like, social media profiles and stuff, and just sort of curious, like, if people are looking or not.
I mean, I think if the person is participating in, tech forums or whatever, and, whether they have an active GitHub presence or on Stacked Exchange or whatever, I mean, that's a net benefit. I suppose if they're out there trolling people on the internet under their real name, that would just make you question their common sense. But I mean, I guess the idea is like, as long as you're not going to disqualify a good candidate because just because they didn't have the opportunity to put a lot of open source code out there in the past or something.
Yeah, I was more thinking like say Twitter or Google Plus or whatever. More like what are they, social media stuff are they doing? Not as much like what artifacts of like work related things. Like I don't I don't I don't go like digging through that as a way to like prejudge the person. Sort of curious if anyone does to any extent.
I mean, I guess a certain amount of Google stalking is to be expected. I mean, especially if you're going to interview someone and you look at what's on their resume and you're like, okay, that's interesting. And then you look at, you Google them or you look at whatever profile, GitHub profiles or whatever they put on their resume. And then, like, if you keep reading and you find out that, they also like to post a whole bunch of stuff on their Twitter where you're like, wow, that's very exciting, but that isn't necessarily relevant to work, then yeah, I guess that does get you to the equal opportunity, like discriminatory question of like, if you're making hiring decisions, you probably should not be making them based on things that are, put them in a protected class or whatever.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said for if someone has like, there are a lot of people who have heavy internet presences or whatever relating to tech stuff. I don't know. So that's probably a good way to get an idea of how someone thinks, to some extent, maybe. Or how someone treats a problem. But, I don't know.
And like I know Jake Champlin here, who's on the call here, wrote a really good blog post after he went to a DevOps days, kind of just talking about how he came to understand more of like what DevOps meant to him. And I'm sure that people would see that post when, Googling him or whatever and hiring him later, they probably are like, yeah, this tells us something about him and the way he thinks. Like Emma is saying, it kind of sheds more light than a resume might have.
Yeah, I'd just be wary of like if I was a hiring manager and I wanted to search for somebody and I came across like a bunch of bullying online or like just being a jerk overall, like then what do you do? Because you can't just be like, well, your tech skills are not lacking, but I really don't want to work with you because you're, part of the patriarchy or whatever.
Well, I suppose it depends on where you're at in the hiring process. I mean, if you haven't scheduled an interview or anything, if you look, you're like, just move on. I don't know. I suppose it depends on like how the process goes and what's documented or not. I mean, everyone, is prejudging them based on something.
Well, there's always the whole not a cultural fit argument, and I always wonder to what degree is that subject to risk of litigation, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, our culture is that you can't be an asshole, so you don't
Basically,
fit.
yeah. But I mean, the problem is that could apply to any other form of discrimination, right? To any legitimate, or I mean, not legitimate, but like legitimately illegal form of discrimination.
That would be an odd discrimination suit. We're discriminating against assholes.
No. I mean, but I mean the argument of the culture argument itself could be used for any number of things. We have a very Christian culture. You're not a cultural fit, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that there's definitely, less ham-fistedly, there's also something like, well, if there's someone who, whenever they respond, they're sort of short with their answers or just direct, but they're not rude or anything, or maybe even their tweets are the same way or whatever. Is that considered to be not a cultural fit? Does everyone need to be able to make small talk conversationally at all times?
Well, I have a friend who's just so blunt. He's amazing. He'll just tell you like things you never want to hear, but it's just like sometimes you appreciate it,
Well, Well, cultural fit, something you can absolutely use as a determination. Where it gets kind of iffy is, say, religion, right? So you can't say, well, hey, you're a Hindu, you can't work here. But you may say, hey, we're most everyone here is Hindu. Are you going to have a problem working? You personally going to have a problem working in this environment when you're a Christian? We're going to have, Ganesh over here in the corner, and we're going to, whatever, right? Is you going to be cool with that? Yeah, and it certainly if it's not an adverse where you go, hey, we don't think you're going to fit here, so go away. That's part of it, right? But definitely saying, after the guys left, talking about it and going, he was pretty abrupt. Kept his answers short, seemed very bright, but I just don't think he would work on the team. Completely legitimate. You can use that as a reason not to hire, and in many states you can use that as a reason for termination. So certainly in a right to work state. Sorry, in a at will state.
But are they abrupt because of any, illness or not illness, disability? That's another question too. If it is.
Well, that makes them covered under another area of law, yes, and that's challenging. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just got Tourette's, and I swear at all my coworkers now. So, I can't help myself. It's a medical condition.
I'm not sure. Yeah, I don't think it works that way.
Oh.
I think there's still something worth it on whether or not you should in that way. I mean, just because someone doesn't communicate the same way that you do, or whatever it is, I still think that maybe there's still some legitimacy to their purpose in being part of your team. It's just.
Oh, I wouldn't argue that. I think the question is probably how do you want to organize your team, right? So you may subscribe if you read No Assholes Rule. You may say, hey, this is how we're going to run our organization, or you may have a more accommodating workplace and saying, we're going to deal with difficult people and keep them on your team. But I think the question I was trying to address is it legal, right?
Yeah.
So if somebody's a jerk, you can fire them for being a jerk. You just have to be really careful about documenting your reasons for it, right? But I think the question's probably more that was originally brought up is, what are the appropriate things to be looking at? And I think maybe interesting question to ask would be, so when you talk about social media, are you looking at cultural fit? Or are you interested in, hey, is this guy visibly contributing to open source, or is he involved in the forums, or are there some of those things that you're looking for, that you're using in the hiring decision?
Yeah. Well, and frankly, it comes down to how much you document versus what's just simply happening internally as you look at people. So, it's sort of a lot of it comes down to that. And then, the potential person, how much you even say about, passing on them, a lot of places, they might get your application, look at all your stuff, and just you never hear anything. At that point, you wouldn't necessarily think, oh, they looked at my Twitter and didn't care for whatever. There's other people. So I'd say it's very much a case of your mileage may vary. But yeah, I actually need to go, so I think we can wrap it up here. And I don't know how frequently we'll continue to do these, but we're back to some degree. So,
Great.
hi and bye.
Oh, good to see everybody.
Yeah.
Bye.
All right, thanks everyone for participating. This was fun.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.